Ja, jeg har mikk. Så gir du sånn signal når vi starter? Ja. Okay, welcome to this meeting this morning. My name is Marianne Aasen. I'm the chair of the Norwegian Biotechnology Advisory Board, and we give advice in technical challenges regarding biotechnology in Norway.
Yeah. My name is Ole Fridtjof Norheim. I'm a medical doctor and a professor of ethics. And I'm the director of Bergen Center for Ethics and Priority Setting. And our aim is to promote ethically acceptable, efficient, what works, and fair policies in global health. So what better than to discuss the topics of today? How to think about genetically modified mosquitoes to reduce the transmission of malaria and reduce the huge mortality burden of malaria, and how to think about the new vaccines that are coming up against malaria now. How should we set priorities among these policies, and what role should Norway have in this regard? And we have a terrific panel today, so I really look forward to this debate, so welcome to all.
So to start this meeting off, we are first going to find out more about malaria and how to fight it. And I have two excellent experts with me today. Pakwanya Twea, PhD Research Fellow at the Bergen Center of Ethics and Priority Setting in Health. Welcome to you. And Eirik Joachim Tranvåg, Medical Doctor and Senior Advisor at the Norwegian Biotechnology Advisory Board. Welcome to both of you. Okay, I start with you. What is malaria and how do you get malaria?
Thank you very much. So malaria is an infectious disease that is spread through a parasite called Plasmodium, and that parasite is usually transmitted to human beings through female Anopheles mosquitoes. So once you get a bite from the mosquito, the parasite is transmitted into your bloodstream, and it moves to the liver where it grows and multiplies and then goes back into the bloodstream, continuing to grow and multiply and spread to other cells. And so what happens is the next time you get bitten by a mosquito, it's transmitted back to the mosquito and transmitted to other people, and that's how it's spread through the population.
I see.
Yeah.
And you're from Malawi,
Yes.
south of in southern part of Africa,
Yes.
and you actually had malaria yourself.
Yeah.
What was that like?
Yeah, I've had malaria before, and of course there are different levels of severity, and many people have different reactions to malaria. In my case, it was more that I had very severe headache, very cold, fatigue, nausea, and it's quite disruptive in the sense that when you get a very severe form of malaria, it can be that you're not really functioning in the time that you are sick. Yeah.
I see. Okay, Eirik, most of the death from malaria are children under 5 years. Why is it so bad for children?
Well, in endemic countries, it's common to be infected several times, and this helps train the immune system against the disease. However, children have not a very strong immune system, and when they are not had that training and not have that fully developed immune system, it's more vulnerable to get the infection. So that's why about 600,000 deaths in 2022, almost 500,000 of them are children.
And what treatment are available so far?
Well, there are different types of anti-malarial drugs, and they are chosen based on symptoms, the type of parasite, and also if there are any resistance to some of the drugs. And also if you are really sick, you need intensive care treatment. But globally, the availability of drugs is a problem, and of course, it is also better not to get sick at all. So prevention is either way crucial.
And how do you do that?
Well, you can do that in different ways. You can actually use the same drugs that you use for treatment as prevention, some of them. So you can take them for a period of time or so on to protect yourself. You can also target the mosquito. you can use insecticides, and you can avoid or remove standing water where they lay their eggs, and just make it tough to be a mosquito. And also you can avoid getting bitten. You can use repellents, you can wear long sleeved shirts, and you can, of course, you should sleep under bed nets, because the mosquitoes, they usually bite in the morning and in the evening.
Yeah, like the mosquitoes in Norway. Yeah. Around 250 million get infected every year, and we can hear that this is a severe problem. Thousands die. How does malaria affect the societies and the countries where malaria is at risk? Economy, health situation, development. Could you please tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, and I think this will just add on to what has been said earlier in terms of, you've just mentioned how many, in terms of incidents in the world, and then we've talked about possible mortality from malaria. So the cost of treating malaria is huge, and I think, as Eric was just mentioning earlier, it's better to also prevent, but there's a cost to prevention as well. So in areas like Malawi, where we have like 6 million cases, at least, not 6 million people getting infected by malaria every year, the cost on treatment is going to be very high, and that's even before you consider the cost of prevention. So just the economic cost on society is huge. And then you have the knock-on effects of that as well in terms of productivity. So for most people, once you have severe cases of malaria, you're incapacitated for a period of time. You can't work if you are in the workforce. You can't go to school if you are in the school system. So it will have also impacts on the human capital accumulation in a country. So you're looking at economic, physical, social effects all across the board in terms of the impact of malaria. Yeah.
Eirik, since the year 2000, there's been a lot of effort and money and different activities trying to get the number of deaths down and decline. And for example, Gates Foundation has really gave a lot of millions of dollars to this cause. But it seems that there's a shift in trends, that it's the few last years, this trend has reversed, and the number of people dying from malaria is now growing up again. Why is that?
Yes, why is that? It's of course probably a lot of reasons. We know that the investments in malaria has been going down for the last decade, and those of you who heard Bjørn Lomborg yesterday talking about the best buys, malaria prevention is really, really effective. It's really one of the best things you can do. So if you invest less money, the burden goes up. So that's one problem. And also climate change, it complicates the global fight against malaria, because a warmer and more humid climate, more extreme weather, it favors the mosquito, it favors the parasite, and it also makes a lot of trouble for us humans, right? Displacement of people, poor infrastructure, and weakened health systems. That's a good thing for all diseases, also malaria. So this favors the disease.
So just a question. I was curious about that. Do the researchers think that it may occur in other places on the earth than Africa?
It will probably spread a bit. There are a few cases now, I think, in Florida and the US, and also in southern Europe. It was fairly prevalent even at least in the southern part of Norway many years ago. But it will probably not be such a problem. The big problem is still the global south and those countries. And one example is Djibouti, which was almost malaria-free. But the last 10 years, the disease is coming back up again because a new type of mosquito has emigrated from Asia. And this mosquito likes urban areas. It bites during daytime, and it is resistant to many of the drugs used in that part of the area. So that creates a new problem when they almost had control of the old one. Yeah.
So what do we do then? What are the new methods developed to try to stop malaria today?
Well, research and development is really, really important. Of course, you have to address poverty, the systems, and so on, but you also need to develop new methods to tackle both the disease and the parasite and the mosquito. And I would like to talk about two of them today. It's genetic biocontrol. It's addressing the mosquito and also the new vaccines. And genetic biocontrol is to apply genetics to living organisms to control or eradicate vectors. And vectors are animals that transmit disease to people. The malaria mosquito, dengue fever, Zika, rabies. Here in the area we have ticks, flot, who can pass both bacterial and viral infections to people. And the new thing, the new breakthrough, is to use genetically modified mosquitoes to decrease the population of mosquitoes. You can insert genes into mosquitoes that spread from one generation to the next. For example, the British company Oxitec has pioneered the insertion of 2 genes that kills all the female offspring. And the male offspring lives on, mates again, and then the next generation of females are killed, and the males can go on and on. And this is really efficient to decrease the mosquito population, and by that, the malaria incidence will also go down.
Okay, then we're done part 1, and we will go. Yeah, you want to add
There
something?
are some things about the mosquito.
Yeah.
It's good. It
Yeah.
reduces chemical
Yeah.
and chemicals in the nature, but there are some ecological concerns and other
Yeah.
concerns as well. Because if you remove or really reduce the population of a species in an ecosystem, you really don't know what is happening.
That's
Will someone else, another mosquito, come in? Will some plants grow up? We don't know. And it is controversial to introduce GMOs at a large scale in nature.
Yeah.
So public acceptance is important, and regulation is important.
Yeah.
And it's a bit different than vaccines, because vaccines we've been having for decades, and it's more controllable. And that gives me the opportunity to talk about vaccines as well, because it's been malaria. We have known for over 100 years that the parasite infect people, and it's mosquitoes is the vector. But now, finally, in the last decades, we have been able to develop new and efficient vaccines. And it's really complicated, because as Bakanja said, the life cycle of the parasite involves humans and mosquitoes, and a lot of different stages. So it's really tricky to make a vaccine. But now we have 2, and they've been rolled out, or is about to be rolled out in different African countries. And a vaccine is really about training the immune system. And these vaccines have to be really good, because when the mosquito bites, it takes only about 30 minutes for 10, 20, 30 parasites to invade the liver. And in this period of time, the immune system of the body has to properly attack the parasites. So what they've done, both vaccines, they've taken a protein from the mosquito that it's every parasite has the protein. And they've combined it with the hepatitis B virus protein, because that virus is known to be used in vaccines because it triggers a really strong response. And they combine this, give the recipe to yeast cells, and the yeast cells produce a new combined protein with this. So this is the main component of the vaccines. And they're really efficient, about 75% efficacy. And that's really good, thinking about 600 million cases each year. But even though this technology is more common and known, there are obstacles there as well. You need 4 doses. The children need 4 doses, and that requires funding and logistical support. But a lot of other things in global health also requires funding and logistical support. So this is a question about priorities, right? Who should pay it, and should they who pay prioritize the vaccine for malaria, other vaccines, both, safe births, or something completely different? That's the question that we hope that we will be a bit smarter about after this meeting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's hope so. We're going to part 2 then, and thank you so much to both of you. I will give the floor to Mette. She's the head of communication in the board. So please.
Now, we've heard how biotechnology opens for new ways of fighting malaria. We've got the new vaccines that Erik has been talking about, and we've got genetic biocontrol. They're 2 very different approaches. Some of the questions around their use are the same, and some are different. And to discuss this, we've got an excellent panel with us today. And I'd like to get them up here now. Lumva Chola, please. Lumva Chola is an associate professor at the University of Oslo and also connected to the Bergen Center for Ethics in Priority and Health Setting. If you can come here. And we've got Professor Zeke Emanuel, Special Advisor to the Director General of the World Health Organization, Professor and Vice Provost for Global Initiatives, University of Pennsylvania, and also with the Bergen Center for Ethics in Priority Setting and Health. We have Lisa Sivertsen, Director at the Department for Human Development at NORAD, the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation. And we have Eirik Mofoss, Director at Langsikt, the Center for Long-Term Policy. Thank you for coming here today. So, Lumva, we're going to start with you. How does the global community decide what to prioritize in global health?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. I think that the first question we should answer is what is global health, maybe. The first question we should ask is what is global health? And global health is really about improving the health of populations and countries and people in countries. So it's about understanding or tackling issues that transcend national borders. We have infectious diseases such as malaria that affect entire regions, entire populations in a region and so on. So priority setting in that sense then requires collaborative efforts between countries and people in those countries, non-government organizations, donors, and so on. And I think that malaria itself is a very good example of how priority setting in healthcare, global health priority setting has been done, in that we first of all identified and acknowledged malaria as a high burden disease that is affecting a big population. And then we considered the cost effective, by we I'm talking about the global community, the cost effective interventions that address malaria. And it required also that the global community comes together to solve this particular problem. So in there, of course, I've mentioned some key criteria for priority setting, which is burden of disease, cost effectiveness, meaning that we want to provide value for money for the investment that we are putting in. We also want to look at equity and reducing health disparities between countries. These are some of the criteria that we can use for setting priorities in global health.
And Zeke Emanuel, you've worked for the Obama administration and the Biden administration. You've traveled around the world advising the US authorities on what to fund and what not to fund. So what do you see as a key to making these decisions in practice?
Well, I wish it were more rational, and I think that's an important point. At the moment, it's not that rational. We've had a plateau in the total funding, and politicians often want something that's identifiable, have goals. Reducing deaths is an easy goal for them. Building up healthcare infrastructure, which isn't as visible as reducing deaths and isn't as acknowledged, is often very difficult to do. And then I would say the other thing that is very difficult to do is to go across diseases. We're talking about malaria, but the same pot of money has to fund HIV, tuberculosis, safe births, et cetera, and we're not very good about allocating across resources. And then the last thing is there's been a big push to get local communities where you're giving the resources involved. They often don't have the same priorities. So I just recount a couple of stories. One, when I was working for the Obama administration, I flew into Senegal, talked to the Minister of Health about what their priority was for the aid that we gave to Senegal. And he told me, he was a politician, not a healthcare provider, not a physician. He said, we want a cardiac catheterization suite in Dakar. And I said, why would you want that? He says, it's inappropriate that our leaders should have to go to Morocco for cardiac catheterization. And I said to him flat out, the United States will not pay. That is not a priority for us. cardiac catheterization. You can go to Morocco, it's safe there. You can go to Paris, wherever you want to go, but we are not paying for it. So often there's a conflict between donors and politicians. And in other cases, there is an agreement. When I was in Mozambique, we were doing male circumcision, extremely effective, one-time intervention. People were lining up. Both the government and the United States wanted to expand this, and it was really a matter of you needed people who were trained to do male circumcision, you needed facilities, et cetera, but at least there was agreement. I think it's really important, as mentioned, that we do take account of not just cost effectiveness, but how much financial and transportation and other burdens it's going to put on people to get the treatment. Again, 4 doses of a vaccine does create barriers. And one of the other things which we don't often take into account, and this will be my last point, is creating a platform that can go across many, many diseases. One of the, I think, appealing things of genetic modified mosquitoes is it's not just good for malaria. As was mentioned, it's good for dengue, Zika, and other malaria, other mosquito-borne diseases. Now, at the moment, it's not cost-effective, but if we can create the right platform, it may become, in fact, cost-effective. And so doing that kind of research and experimentation to bring the cost down, to make it more effective, is valuable. And it's something that, as decision makers, we need to take into account. And we don't often take that into account, creating the right kind of platforms. So I think this is an evolving area where I hope that politicians become a little more rational about what to prioritize.
And Lumba, if we do implement the malaria vaccine, as we've said, it's 4 doses, it requires a lot of effort. Will that mean that there'll be less uptake of other vaccines, or could it be arranged in a way on the ground that it means it can be combined with other programs? How does that work in practice?
Well, I mean, it depends, and I think we've seen in the past that an introduction of a new vaccine can be beneficial in countries. We're talking about when you introduce a vaccine, you have to have the right infrastructure, you have to have the cold chain, you have to have people that are trained to do it. But it's very expensive to introduce a new vaccine. But it can, of course, be beneficial if it is included or added to routine immunization. But that is also very difficult because it requires a lot of effort. You have to train a lot of people. And then we've seen in the recent past that there's been issues like vaccine hesitancy. So we need to ask as well, are populations ready to get new vaccines? Have we moved on from COVID and the pushback that people had and communities had? And I think that there is a lot of negative attitude towards vaccines that has not been addressed. So introducing a new vaccine, in my opinion, I think will require significant effort in sensitizing the community, in working with communities and so on. So it's not straightforward. And I think that we need to really look at the costs of introducing a new vaccine.
And Lisa Sivertsen, NORAD's main purpose is to ensure that Norwegian development aid funds are spent in the best possible way. Today, we spend less of those money on global health than we used to. What's behind this development?
Yeah, there has been a decline, a rather small decline, the last year. I think it comes down to the fact that although Norwegian politicians across political parties do have a high commitment to aid, there are so many demands now today, and I think the increase that we see in conflict since 2011, there's been a steady increase. The burden on especially fragile settings because of environmental and climate crisis, and also increased inequality, the backlash on democracy and human rights. I think all these trends are creating increased needs. So there are increased needs for humanitarian funding. There is increased need for, education, health, food security efforts. So although the aid budget in total is still, it's still 1% of the BNP in Norway. But Ukraine, Gaza, inequality, food security, it's all taking increasing parts of the budget. So it's a difficult situation, I think, for the politicians, even in a country where the support is quite big from the parliament to continue to allocate substantial funding to aid.
Can I respond? So the first thing I would say is Norway, I don't want you to pat yourself on the back as an American, but you do punch above your weight, and in global health you are a recognized world leader, and the world looks to how Norway is thinking, so it's very important how Norway thinks. Everyone in the world does respect your judgment. The second thing I would say is that when we look at all of the demands for global assistance, I think everyone agrees, even foreign aid skeptics who are sort of skeptical about the benefits of giving foreign aid agree that health investments are the best long-term investment. You can put a Band-Aid on refugees, but solving the underlying problem is way more complicated, whereas in healthcare, whether it's vaccines or improving health, have enormous, especially in malaria, where most of the damage is done to young kids, have enormous long-term consequences. And so I think the priority setting within all of those things, not just which disease we fund, but within the broad spectrum of refugee aid and democracy and all the rest, health ought to rise to the top because it has this positive effect, and a positive effect for 60, 70, if you save one child at 4 years old, 70 years, 80 years.
So I'm not a politician, so I don't make those decisions.
I'm
on
a professor.
But still the global aid budget is triple the size of education, food security. So it's still a very substantial part of the aid budget in Norway. But there is increasing constraint, I think, on the aid budget in general, and even food security, which was number one top priority for this government, even in that area we have seen small reductions. So it's across, actually.
So what are the main criteria that NORAD are guided by today then?
Well, we depend on the experts. I have a small, highly knowledgeable, committed team in our global health section, but Norway has a long history of investing in research, analysis. We spend a lot of time gathering data, working together with BSEPs, working with academic institutions, working with Gavi, WHO, the Global Fund, Unit Aid, and so we do try to gather the analysis and data and evidence that is available, and then we do an analysis not only on what works, but also how we can make it work. So who can we partner with on the political, like governments or actors, NGOs, academic institutions. No one can do this on their own. I mean, you need to be part of an ecosystem of global health actors because they complement each other, and we need to do that. So it's it's not easy, but we really try to give advice to the politicians based on the best possible knowledge available.
Now, Eirik Morfoss, you've argued that Norwegian developmental aid funding should be more geared towards what is effective and what is proved to be effective. How does that differ from what you see today? And could you talk a bit more about that?
So a lot of my criticism has been based on the fact that I think Norwegian policymakers and NORAD as well does too little to prioritize the most effective interventions. But I want to stress that within health, I think this is an exception. I think Norwegian health spending is probably exceptionally good. And I also think it's not mainly a problem of NORAD or bureaucracy in this sense. But Norwegian health spending has been quite steady level for the last 10 years. But in real kroner terms, it's been reduced by about 7%. If you measure it in dollars, the Norwegian currency is weak. It's 30-40% down. And at the same time, the Norwegian economy has grown a lot. I mean, even since 2020, our GDP is 70% higher than it was. Our oil fund has made 1,400 billion NOK this year, according to headlines today. So we're extremely rich, and a percentage of our ODA, or development aid going to health, has been declining, both in kroner terms and measured in dollars. And I think there's a lot of reasons for this. I think we don't have a political leadership giving priority right now to global health. I think that's sad. I think it's partly because it's not in the headlines. It's been a long time since we had big happening. We had COVID, but COVID did not make us focus on poor countries, rather the opposite. Also, I think it's not political. There's no conflict, so it doesn't get attention. Now, I'll be a bit provocative, but October last year, 1,200 people were killed in Israel by Hamas. That's horrible, and what has happened after that has been even more horrible. But 1,200 people, that's less than malaria kills every day, every year, right? So this is a huge problem, and it's mainly kids. And I think Norwegian politicians should dare to say we should spend a lot more than the 8-9% we spend on global health now. We should dare to say that maybe we should cut back on climate spending, on education, on marine littering, and double or triple what we spend on global health.
Now, Zeke, I've got a question for you here, because you mentioned that Norway has a role that is quite a lot bigger than
5 million people.
Yes. But so when Norwegian funding for global health goes down, does that set a trend for other countries to follow? Or does it?
No. Look, in the early 2000s, global aid funding dramatically increased, especially with the U.S., PEPFAR, the Gates Foundation, and others. And then beginning, 2012, 2013, it began to plateau. I do think there is what's called donor fatigue, which is we've given all this money, and now we're moving on. Democracy, the latest crisis, whatever it is. That is just a recognized problem. I think the other problem is, as Eric pointed out, what happens down there has not affected us much. Ebola probably was, which is now a decade old almost, probably the last time that there was an infectious disease in a developing country or a low-income country that everyone was worried would spread. But it hasn't been that big a problem. And I do think this issue of the latest threat is very important to motivate people. It's hard to see, frankly, going forward, how we're going to have a big increase. There's a lot of reasons for it. The big economies in East Asia, China, Korea, Japan, they don't have a tradition, frankly, of funding global health. And I can tell another story. We were raising money for Gavi, and I happened to chair the committee, and the Koreans were going to be magnanimous. They were going to pledge $1 million. And I basically said, well, that's a joke. We'll move on, because that's not a real amount of money for vaccines, which we all know are hugely effective, cost-effective on every scale, actually cost-saving, not just cost-effective. So we have to get a tradition outside of Europe, the United States, Australia, Canada to fund global health. But I think we are going to have to learn how to do more with, if not less, flat. And that does require a lot of decisions about allocation. I would say that we do need to focus on healthcare. Everyone agrees it has multiples that are well exceed investments in other areas. And within healthcare, I would say one of the things I was most proud of when I did serve in the Obama administration is the fact that we did double what we spent on malaria. Why did we double what we spent on malaria? Because I looked at the data and I was like, wow, you have an effective intervention. You've been hiding this from the world. There's hardly any publicity about it. The other area I was very proud of increasing dramatically for the United States was neglected tropical diseases. That neglected word says everything you want to know. They're neglected. But 1 billion people around the world are affected by schistosomiasis, elephantitis, these 7 diseases, and they're rendered, they can't earn an income, they become a liability to the family. It's a real problem. They don't really die of the disease, but we have very cheap interventions that we know can totally prevent these. We increased our funding, we got the drug companies to donate the drugs. Those are the kinds of things, creative solutions we have to actually see how to affect and get politicians to recognize these are long-term investment, one-time long-term investments. And that's, I think, the direction we really have to push. Crises, Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan now, they're very important. But we also need to see what are the best long-term investments rather than the current areas which we're not going to solve. We're not going to solve Ukraine, Russia immediately. That's a military issue, unfortunately. Gaza is not going to be solved immediately. It's been going on for hundreds of years. So I think healthcare does present a very, very good area for long-term returns for everyone, the country as well as the world.
Now, if we move on to genetic biocontrol, the use of genetically modified mosquitoes, we get a whole host of new issues here. One thing is it could be incredibly effective and much easier in a way. You don't need to vaccinate every single child. But we yet don't know what will happen if we release a large amount of mosquitoes and how it will affect the ecosystems. So how could Norway as a funder make decisions about whether or not we should help fund this? Lumbe, what do you think?
It is a very big risk, and we are, wading into the unknown here. And maybe a few years from now, we find out that it was a huge mistake. But we don't know. And I think what I like about humanity is that we always push the boundaries, and I think that we should do the same here. But of course with caution. We have to do a lot of research. We work with the researchers. We have to work with the communities. We really have to understand what the risks are, and then we can weigh the benefits against the risk. Of course, when we're talking about the benefits, maybe we're talking about, are we comparing vaccines to the standard of care to the new technology. But I think that we really have to look at what are the potential risks and how we can mitigate them.
And for Norway as well, local involvement is very important.
Definitely. So there is now a shift in our sort of policies on global health that we are really trying to move towards health system strengthening and trying to unpack what is that actually. But that's also based on a very strong message coming from Malawi and other countries and governments that we work with. But also a need to look at how climate and environmental issues are impacting and also probably changing the needs quite rapidly in many country contexts. So you need to have that, contextualize, more sort of flexible approach to ensure that you will be efficient also 10, 20, 30 years ahead from now. But I just wanted to we do not have any expertise on biotechnology in Norway, so we depend on research from partners. But we are aware of the risk that new innovations. Norway has always funded innovation, and that's a proud history, and we will continue to do that. But we are very much aware of the alternative costs of new initiatives and the risk of tried and tested preventive methods, for instance, being deprioritized. I mean, that's a huge risk. We still need to have enough sufficient emphasis on prevention, like bed nets and also the whole sort of the health structure that you need, health systems, primary healthcare. That still needs a lot of investment as well. So finding that balance between investing in new promising interventions and also still try to highlight the basic core need for stronger health systems in fragile contexts. That's where we try to work every day in that balance.
Now, Zeke, in the US, you're a lot more accustomed to using genetic modification. Most of the corn is genetically modified. GMO food is quite common. In Norway, we just don't have it. We don't want it. How do you think that can influence whether or not this gets used? Because there's such different attitudes worldwide to genetic modification.
Well, we are more comfortable, I would say, with GMOs, and we're more comfortable with allowing foodstuffs to come on the market. On the other hand, I do think creating sterile mosquitoes or mosquitoes that make the females die does have a big environmental risk. I mean, mosquitoes are part of a very important food chain for birds and others. So it's very important to get it right and to figure out the appropriate use, the appropriate amount to suppress the mosquito population. I mean, but we have to recognize we've had a situation, and now I probably will be controversial. DDT was introduced broadly. It turned out to be a terrible disaster for birds. On the other hand, spreading DDT inside houses to kill mosquitoes has turned out to be fantastic intervention for malaria. And so we have to get the balance right, and part of that getting the balance right is doing a lot of research and understanding the positives and negatives before we have widespread experimentation. We've released, I think, a few billion mosquitoes that are genetically modified. In the context of the world, that's a very small number. It does have risks, right? And we shouldn't downplay the risks. And one of the issues, I think, of consulting countries that I try to illustrate with my Senegal example is countries have their own priorities. And their own priorities may not be the long-term for the population. They may be the short-term for the leaders. And so we have to balance listening to countries, but also getting more long-term benefits to the population writ large. And I think, part of the problem is, would environmental damage happen? That's not something governments tend to worry about. They tend to worry about the present, right, and the next election. But we who are funders, who can take a little more of a long-term view, I think often have to impose that view. And we just have to recognize that's a more important view. We have to avoid long-term health damage, long-term environmental damage with the interventions we're dealing. That doesn't mean we step back from innovation. That would be a mistake because we haven't solved these enormous problems. But we do have to balance that risk, and that inevitably requires investing in innovation. But I think the one very exciting thing about GMOs that we haven't is that could be a platform change for all mosquito-borne diseases, and those are enormous health burden to the world. Again, dengue and Zika, as well as malaria.
But Lisa, these mosquitoes, they obviously don't respect country borders. They will fly wherever they fly. How can Norway, as a donor country, agree on funding a program in one country if the neighbors are saying we don't want this?
Yeah, good question. I mean, again, I don't think any of these interventions will be like a one-country effort. It will be, you will definitely, we work closely with WHO, we work with all our global partners like Gavi, the Global Fund, and together with AU, the African Union. I think, I think none of these efforts will, I think, be decided upon in one country and then massively being invested in. I don't think that will happen. But yeah.
I think we've spoken about local-led development, and this debate happens in a context of priority setting. And we need to remember that the cost and benefits, as Manuel spoke about. Yes, there are risks, but there are always risks and downsides to everything we do. But the upside could be enormous. I think Norway is very anti-GMO. I think it's very non-scientific, and I think we need to work on this at home. But if we really do think that, and which I do, that we should let more development be decided by the people we try to help, let them decide about the risks. I'm pretty convinced that if we had malaria come to Europe and Norway, we would be more willing to experiment with new technologies, because we would feel the risk and the downside as well. Whereas now, and it feels like saving 600,000 lives, that's something far away. And I wish we were morally stronger and better beings and more able to feel this pain at home. And another example of this, I know they're doing experiments with this in golf courts in Sweden, because rich people don't like to have mosquitoes, even when they're malaria-free. But to get approval for doing the same experiments in Burkina Faso or Mozambique can be challenging. And they might have good reasons for that. I'm not the expert in this room, but I don't think Norwegian politicians should be the bottleneck for trying to solve these huge global problems.
How can we make any funding decisions on genetic engineering or genetic biocontrol in cooperation with the donor countries? How can we do that in the best way?
I think we have to go back to what has worked in the past when it comes to global cooperation, and I think that is one of the key criteria for, we started off by asking how should priority setting be done in the global health context, and a huge part of that is countries coming together to understand what the issue is, what the risks are, and agreeing on a way forward. And I think that we have the Global Fund, like Eirik said, we have the WHO, we have think tanks that are thinking about this, and I think that we need to bring the global community together to discuss and agree on the way forward. And I think that the Norwegian government can, as it does always, can take advice from our global partners.
Now, at one of the other meetings here at Arendal that happened yesterday, it was said that politicians need that one sentence that they can put into their New Year's speech. It could be, we do vaccines in foreign aid, or like Erna Solberg said, we do education for girls. Could or should malaria be the next New Year's speak sentence?
I wouldn't actually focus only on a single disease. I think that's actually a mistake. I do think improving global health is a benefit to everyone in the world. And that, I think, is what we need to focus on. Because what the priority is going to be at any one time is going to change, right? I mean, what was 25, 30 years ago, HIV was the problem. Devastated. HIV has dropped, I won't say we haven't turned the corner completely, but we now have an intervention, one shot that can prevent transmission for a year. It's not the same level of problem. And so I would hesitate to focus on a single disease. I would prefer, and I think this is something that Norway has done over time, global health writ large, and solving the problems, that is got to be the focus. That's the one sentence. We're going to help save, however many million lives we're going to put. If you had to make a big push, we did this in the United States, and I think it's the right focus. Reduce under 5 mortality by half. That's a goal that the world should be able to get around, because if a kid makes it to 5, a child makes it to 5, they're likely to live a long, fruitful life. And we have the tools to do that. Malaria is one of them, but it's only one.
And if Norway sets that as a goal, will other countries follow?
Again, Norway, as we say in America, fights above its weight. It's only 5 million people, but it really has a major outside influence in setting the world global health agenda. And I think it would have a lot of sway for a lot of other countries.
And Eirik?
Yeah, I wish the Norwegian Prime Minister would say that Norway played an important role in the past revolution within child mortality. We more than halved the child mortality in the past 20 years.
Yep.
We could do the same in the next 20 years by focusing on a few highly mortal conditions and diseases that are neglected around the world, and even more so neglected now because of geopolitics and increased focus on climate. Norway could be a big champion also within the next revolution.
Well, I think the example of maternal health is a good example of something that was highly visible as a political priority in Norway and in other countries, and we were able to reduce the mortality dramatically in many countries. But we also learned a lot about the barriers and the structures that we needed to have in place and the systems, and the mortality is still high. So there, even within, and malaria is the same, the massive investments, and still the mortality is high. So I think that kind of proves that you need a long-term investment. You need to have that ecosystem of actors working together. You need to have a local ownership, a long-term commitment from so many different actors, and there will always be a complexity of issues that needs to be worked with in any context. Just look at family planning and the US. The backlash on family planning in one of the richest countries in the world. So it's not an easy. There is no silver bullet in global health, and that, I think, and that's why we have this increased focus now on health system strengthening. You need to have the health workers. You need to be able to have a rural infrastructure because people still live in rural areas, etc., etc. So no silver bullet, but a lot of really. We definitely look to research and evidence to make sure that we make the smartest investments. But the research is also showing us that there is no silver bullet. If the research will show us that there is a silver bullet, I think it will be quite fairly easy to convince politicians.
I would disagree. We have lots of silver bullets.
Yeah, there are lots of silver bullets. I agree.
We have vaccines. We've in malaria. We have
absolutely.
I would say to extract the 2 key points here. We have learned one of the key elements are building infrastructure. You need trained and healthcare personnel, you need facilities, you need supply chains for drugs and diagnostic equipment. You do need those things, and you can't work without those things. And one of the great benefits of focusing on HIV is that we did recognize those infrastructure needs and built them up in sub-Saharan Africa. And the other is maternal child health. Again, that's a place. The maternal and the delivery, making sure the mother's safe, and getting kids to age 5. Those are probably the 3 biggest interventions we've had, and will continue to be the 3 biggest areas in need of focus for the foreseeable future.
You seem to have a silver bullet.
Yeah, at least it's not a politician, but I think politicians should focus on the silver bullets. I think we have, and at least some are more shining and silverish than others. I mean, Norway spends as much money now removing plastic from oceans as we do on neglected tropical diseases. We spend more money on paying for gas for Ukraine than on vaccines. We give twice as much money to Ukraine as we do on global health in total. In the context of priority setting, if you look at the mandate of Norwegian development assistance, I think that's wrong. That's not something NORAD can do anything about. They operate on a mandate and a budget. But I would like, in this context, with a lot of people who know a lot about health priorities, but also priority setting in general, to challenge them and say, is this really what it is about? This is the 1% of our economy we spend on fighting global inequality and people who have less than us. Should we focus on geopolitics and climate mitigation? I think not. There are lots of silver bullets within global health, and we should finance more of them.
Lumva, what is your wish?
My
for-
thought is that we spend a lot of time talking about how much money should we spend, and we don't really understand the impact of what it is that we're doing. I'll give you an example. I've been connected to the Center for International Health at the University of Bergen since 2005, and lots and lots of people from low and middle income countries are being trained, and that is part of global health spending. Everywhere I go, and I visit a lot of countries, I find products of Norwegian investment in health. And what they've been able to do in their own countries is very, the ripple effects are there to see. We haven't measured them. And we're not looking at that. And I think that because we are not really measuring this impact, we kind of like get blinded by how much money we should spend and so on. And we get bogged down into politics and so on. But I think that we really need to look at the human stories. What is the benefit to Norway as well? I think we need to consider that because we're spending Norwegian tax money, and we need to tell the Norwegian population what the benefit is. And I can personally attest to the fact that there is a huge, huge benefit in saving the life of one kid in a low and middle income countries.
So what ripple effects are you thinking about?
It is getting people out of poverty, for example. The skills and sustainability of the skills within the countries. If you train one health economist in Norway, they're training 10, 20, hundreds of other health economists in low and middle income countries. And I think that we're sharing the knowledge and the experience of how to tackle global health issues. That cannot, I think it can't be quantified. The benefit of that can't be quantified.
Well, I think if you have a child and eliminate a lot of diseases through vaccination or reduce their risk of getting malaria or other illnesses, they're able to go to school, as was said, get an education, become more productive, maybe come overseas, get an education, go back and make the system more efficient, make sure it's spending the money better. These are all, as I think you correctly point out, these are all benefits of early investments, and we have to take into account the broader context. That does mean, assessing these kind of health investments over time. But every assessment has shown how hugely beneficial. Again, I want to just go back to a point I made before. Even the skeptics of foreign assistance, and there are plenty of them that say, you're making countries, beggar countries, where the politicians don't have to be accountable for how they spend the money. Even those skeptics recognize that one of the major exceptions is investment in global health, that it is widely beneficial for the long term across many domains, not just health, but education, economy, etc. And so that's a good justification for investing. Malaria is still a major threat, and the graph is going the wrong direction instead of the right direction, and so I think we need to reverse that.
I think that will have to be the last word for
Sorry.
today. Thank you very much to Eirik Mofoss, Lisa Sivertsen, Zeke Emanuel, and Lumva Jola.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ja.
Okay, thank you all for your time, and the audience for your time and attention, both here spend the time following us here in this room, but also on the stream. And a special thanks for all the participants in the two panels for your insights on the global health in general and the challenge with malaria specific. It's not easy to solve, as I think we all learned, and it's really difficult challenges. But maybe biotechnology has there's some solutions there, but I think also there's a solution in general in public health, in education, and in and all together with these different alternative policies. It's possible to improve and get that more children can live up and take their education and develop their own country. So thank you all for attending this meeting, and safe journey home.